fighting. All right. Woo! All right. Don't leave your computer at home and have to go back home and get it. And then have people complain about running late just because they like to complain about stuff. Call you out in front of everybody. It's a little soggy. We need a little rain. You farmer, where's Oscar? Farmers need a little rain, or are you already too waterlogged down there, Oscar? You already too waterlogged, or you need rain? One way or the other? How about you?
We're good.
We're good. We're full. How about your house? We're good. We're good. All right. So he can turn it off anytime he gets ready. Is your driveway got water in it? So we're sloshing, or are we going around? Jaylee, you cold? Just sweat. Soggy dog. 10-4. 10-4. If you want to open to Genesis 11, we're going to be in the last couple verses and then roll right into chapter 12 this morning. Talk a little bit about Abraham. Mr. Dean, can I pick on you for an opening prayer just before we get started with our Bible class? Be mindful of the slaughters. There's a couple of them at home not feeling good. They're hoping it's food poison and not a stomach bug, but just out of abundance of caution, they're all staying home just to make sure. So I know be mindful of them this morning. That's the main one I got because I got that text rolling in this morning. So be mindful. Anybody else we want to mention quickly before we have that prayer we need to have on our minds? Yes, ma'am.
My mom's having a procedure tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
In Thomasville, and then surgery on May 6th in Tallahassee.
Okay. Procedure tomorrow and then May 6th. I see Shane and I see Miss Jan writing, so just make sure they are two that take care of us. While I'm thinking about it, Miss Jan, is it posted back there?
Yes.
All right, so Miss Jan, there's a couple people wanted a directory. She's printed out what she had information-wise. There may be some families either not on there yet that we need to write on there, and then you need to, each family kind of go just check and make sure the information that you see is correct and the information you want. If there's a missing cell phone number, make sure we get that in there, something like that. But Miss Jane does a lot of work to assemble all that, but before we print that for people, we want to make sure as much as we can the information's correct. The thing about a directory, literally as soon as you print it, it'll be out of date. Somebody's going to move. Somebody's cell phone going to change. Some new family going to come in or somebody going to leave. But just, we appreciate you doing all that work. But before she printed that, just wanted to give families a chance to look at it, make sure the information's correct. I think that's on the back bulletin board. I was supposed to check that over, but I was running late this morning. You gave it perfect, and she's probably better. She's probably better at that than I am anyway, but we'll make sure. So if you want to check that. Mr. Dean, without further ado, if you want to kick us off this morning. Amen. All right, so we're in the genealogy of Jesus. We started out in Matthew. We looked a little bit at Luke. We're following Matthew's, where he starts out with Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham. We did David last week. Now we're to Abraham. So much applies to us. I'll just kind of even point to the end. Galatians 3, if you've been baptized into Jesus Christ, guess whose seed you're a part of? Abraham. So everything we talk about, that's just Old Testament stuff. That's us. And the promise is made to him. We're beneficiaries of that. And we're still looking forward to even the total fulfillment. So just because we're studying something way, way back, it's as relevant as where you're sitting this morning. It's as current as where you're sitting this morning. We are We are the children of Abraham. We are part of that seed. And so it's kind of a big deal what we're going to talk about this morning. Just to kind of introduce, if I was to quiz you, Bible quiz trivia, the 3 blessings of Abraham, would you pass my quiz? Like pop quizzes, I always hated teachers that do that to you. They don't even give you the information. Like a cold comp? Here's your cold comp. That's the one where you don't get it prepare ahead of time, just trying to figure out where you are. Here's your cold comp. What's the blessings of Abraham? We can work as a class on this one. It's not an individual test. This is a group project.
The promised land.
The promised land, the seed, and nations. Nations, seed, and land are part of those. What else can you tell me about? Was he always called Abraham? What was his first name? Abram. Man, and now this would truly be cold comp. Does anybody have a clue what either one of those names mean? This is real tough stuff. Nobody would probably know Abram. Like if you would, I would just get down and let you come up and teach the rest of Bible class this morning. If you just pull that one without even having to prepare. Abram means exalted father. Then he switches his name to Abraham in Genesis 17. And you could guess what Abraham means. Father of all nations, or father of a great number, something along that line, which kind of makes sense, right? Based on the blessings that he's given, that you are the father of a multitude is basically a picture of that. I want to pick up in Genesis 11. I want to read a little bit about his father-in-law, and then we're going to kind of roll into chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. So let's start, and let's just do 31 and 32 of chapter 11, and then we'll do the first 8 of chapter 12. Anybody, a couple people maybe want to read? We can kind of break some of this up. Who all maybe wants to read this morning? Michael, if you'll do 11:31, you're going to get the bad one because you're going to have all them funky names. But 11:31, if you'll read through verse 3, and then who else wants to read this morning? Oh, I saw somebody else. Bill, if you'll do then 4 through 8. So you got 11:31 through 12:3. That should kind of be the end of that indented section, and then 4 through 8. All right, here we go.
There took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Balaam, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out to the from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed."
So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At that time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "I will give this land to your descendants." And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord, who had appeared to him. After that, Abram traveled south and set up camp in the hill country, with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. There he built another altar and dedicated it to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord.
Abraham, a pretty familiar character. And as I was preparing for this class, I wanted to obviously touch the big things, what might be things that we all know, but there was a couple of things that were probably less familiar to me that I thought would be good for us to think about, to talk about together this morning, just to kind of to mix it up. Did you catch how old Abram is when he's called to go on this journey where he doesn't know where he's going, the way the Hebrew writer says? How old was he? 75. Now, I know they age differently, possibly. I mean, we know they live longer. So I don't know if there's an adjustment factor, but 75 years is pretty well established, correct? Like he's been in a certain way of thinking, a certain way of living, a certain way of doing for a while, correct? I want to give you a little tidbit that kind of stood out that, as I was preparing for this. If you want to keep your finger here, go to the book of Joshua and look at chapter 24. And I want you to think about, why did God call him to go on this, just get up, start going, and I'll tell you where we're going along the way, is kind of the picture. The way the Hebrew writer puts it, sets out not knowing where he's going. God tells you to pack up and let's go. That's kind of rough. And you probably heard that part about it. You ever think about the why behind it? Maybe we're talking about promised land and there's some reasons there, but there might be other factors. Look at Joshua 24. And the reason I started in 11 is because it mentioned Terah, Abraham's father. All right, I mentioned some of those other people. Look at Joshua 24 and look, if you would, at verse 2. Joshua 24 and verse 2. Matt, do you mind reading that verse for us?
Joshua said unto all the people, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, dwelt on the other side of the flood at one time, in Terah, the father of Abraham, the father of Nahor, they served other gods.
Did you catch that? What did he say about Abraham's father, Terah? They lived on the other side, and what did they do? That was new to me. That was, just like, that's not one of the more, kind of filed away in my Abraham files that his father-in-law, his father lived. There's a reason why we need to get him out of some of this foreign territory. He's 75 years old and still living with his father. So does that give you a little bit new appreciation for when God comes along and says, hey, let's go, what did he know about God? That's where I'm not sure the Bible text tells us as much as I'd probably like to know about. Where do they get introduced to each other? When God comes to call a person and they've already been worshiping a different way, that upped my stock value of how I think about Abraham and his faith. We're going to talk about it in the sermon today. He's called the father of faith. Does that give you a little bit? It's not like, well, he'd always been raised in the church, and then he kind of takes his mantle. Does it change your way of thinking about hearing that about his father? Are there any impressions, Matt? That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm. Leave that job, come to me. Leave the father's job, or the father, come follow me. That was interesting. It's kind of interesting fact about that's Abraham's background. Something else. It was mentioned twice in the reading, and both times came up in Bill's reading. There's something Abraham does twice in chapter 12. Did you catch that? What was it, Bill?
Built an altar dedicated to the Lord.
All right, so we're traveling along, nomadic style. He's still not even sure where the final destination is. We're just packing up. He gets to a place, and he builds an altar there, and he worships. Then let's keep going a little bit farther in our journey. We're going a little bit farther, and when he gets there, sets up camp. What does he do? What does that mean to you? I mean, why is that even maybe recorded for us that he's doing that?
It's not been very long since God destroyed the world. And Noah and his sons, I'm sure they taught their children, what had just happened. This is a short time, and we got people worshiping other gods already. I mean, that's how quick you can lose the importance of worshiping God, the only God, in a short period of time. If you don't study, that's why we're instructed every week to take the Lord's Supper. On account of God knows how short our memories are and the way we react. Listen, good example. I mean, the world was destroyed.
That's right.
And just a few generations, they back to work
different. You got Genesis 6 happens, not very long Tower of Babel happened. I mean, like you said, it doesn't take long for that to change. his family has obviously been part of that culture. If Joshua 24 flat out says that his father, maybe his father was converted as well, but he was part of worshiping other gods. And so when the God, the one true God, comes along and calls Abraham, Abraham's willing to follow. He's willing to listen. And everywhere he moves, what's important to him? I'm going to worship. Wherever I am, wherever God calls me, I'm going to stop. And I don't know exactly the process because I've never had to build one. But building an altar, a little bit of effort. I mean, there's different styles where we have, like in Joshua has some about gathering stones, and they even carried stones from here. It's some kind of stacking. It's something you can burn something on. It's got to be strong enough to like maybe have a burnt offering lay on top of it. But everywhere he goes, that's one thing that kind of jumped out to me as I was reading on. That's not the only 2 times this happens, but there's multiple times where he stops wherever he is, and we're going to build an altar because worship is that important to him, to his family, to the way that he's leading. All right. Any other thoughts along that lines, or just impressions that points that you take from that? So this would have been hard for anybody to prepare for. I didn't have any way to send this out. So kind of what I did to prepare is I just read. So you start here in chapter 12. Abraham's going to die in chapter 25. All right. So just kind of give you got from chapter 12 of Genesis to chapter 25. It's going to be him kind of coming on the scene as God blessing him. And then he's only got to chapter 25. He's going to pass away. We have all of my if you were going to think about your New Testament knowledge of Abraham, what events or thoughts or stories do you think New Testament wise about Abraham? Or just in general, what's your, when you think Abraham, what's the big event you think of? Isaac's the big one. That's going to happen in 22. That's mentioned in Hebrews 11. Any other details about that, or just any other thoughts come to your mind when you think about Abraham? Wes?
Being with Lot and then having to go save them.
All right, we got that event. We're going to. So, I kind of had the big ones. Isaac's the big one. And Isaac's the big one for a couple of things. Not just the big Genesis 22, go offer him, but he gets promised something here in chapter 12. He's 75. You read Sarai is her name, the AI, and her name gets changed as well, because she's going to be blessed. And the first time, I don't know how all this plays out, but Abraham gets these blessings when the heavenly visitors come and show up and remind Abraham of the promises, and Sarah's kind of standing around in the background. This is not the first time God's given him this promise. This is the latest reminder. Do you remember what Sarah's response is? But this promise about your seed been around since chapter 12. And I would just have to believe that his wife is a part of that. So one of the things that struck me in reading through, and I just kind of just read it over and over, just kind of reading through, the thing that stood out to me is that God comes and reassures Abraham multiple times. Anything, reason why he might need that?
Getting old. The physical body ain't like it was when he was 25 and 30. And imagine me having a child at this age after age.
Well, and just to put the biblical words on what Billy is saying, just keep your finger. Look at Romans 4. This is kind of like Paul's retelling and using Abraham as an example, but he uses a phrase to talk about Abraham and Sarah that's, I don't know, kind of blunt and pretty powerful. Romans 4. Look at 18 through 25. Romans 4, 18 through 25. Miss Yvonne, do you mind reading that? Romans 4, 18 through 25.
Against all hope, Abraham in hope believed, and so became the father of many nations, just as it had been said to him, so shall your offspring be. Without weakening in his faith, he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and that Sarah's womb was also dead. Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he had promised. This is why it was credited to him as righteousness. The words "it was credited to him" were written not for him alone, but also for us, to whom God will credit righteousness. For us who believe in him who raised Jesus our Lord from the dead. He was delivered over to death for our sins and was raised to life for our justification.
All right, I had to read a little bit more just because that's going to help us later in the sermon portion. But what was the verbiage of the parts before about Abraham? And there's two of them. Abraham himself is
As good as dead.
good as dead. Around 75, good as dead. I was just thinking you're almost as good as dead is what I heard as my brain. You brought it up, so I was just, pointing that out there. As good as dead is what God would say about Billy Wiles. All right. And then what did he say about Sarah? Her womb. It's toast. So they both, now, what are you going to say about it? I mean, he's about 100 years old, and that kind of tells me that whether, they live longer lives or not, even in Abraham's time, whatever that number looked like, however they aged, it was still, everybody would have recognized this is beyond the regular time. This is beyond and nothing's happening. So he gets this promise, and he believes enough in the promise to get up and start moving. And part of the promise is you're going to be blessed. Your wife's going to have a kid. Through you, you're going to be the father of many nations. And he's almost 100 and hadn't had any kids yet. When he's called the father of faith, I hope that kind of, these are Bible stories. But man, when you put yourself into these stories and realize this is real life, these are real people. They're not super Christians. We've exalted them because of their examples, whatever. But when God comes to Abraham, Abraham's a guy just like you and I. Kind of like when James talks about that Elijah was a man with a nature. He's just a human. He's a man with a nature like ours. When he prays, God answered. Abraham is just like any one of you. And when God comes and asks him this big kind of leap of faith, Abraham says, you know what, I'll do it. Because of what Romans 4 said. Because he believed that God would do what he said he would do. Brother Bill?
Times, on the 11th time you see or get something different or more out of it. In verse 20, Abraham never wavered in believing God's promise. And I guess that's kind of where my mind stops. The rest of that verse says, in fact, his faith grew stronger. So he was not sitting still during this whole time waiting for the promise. He was growing stronger and stronger.
Does that, the very point you just make, because we're going to kind of leapfrog back and forth, but does that point maybe, I've given Abraham a pretty hard time for the one time he kind of tries to help God out with this promise. Y'all know where I'm going with that? When is it that Abraham and Sarah kind of like try to help God out with the plan? Ishmael. Well, because that he so believes in what God has promised him, but right now reality says, I'm 100. My wife's womb is dead. She hasn't had a kid for this long either, but I still so believe in this promise. Well, maybe this is what. Does that give you maybe a little bit of grace in them? Because I've been pretty hard on him about what they do there. But does maybe that kind of tell? He so believed what God said he was going to do, but couldn't see how it was going to happen here with Sarah because her womb is dead, obviously. So he must mean something else. It just kind of, I don't know. It just helps me give him a little bit of grace on, maybe why they came up with that plan. And they're still trying, I think, with good intentions to help fulfill the promise. Now, obviously, it's error, and it doesn't. God kind of shows them, no, that's not what I had in mind. It's you and Sarah, buddy. It's going to work out. I don't know, just some thoughts there. We don't have time to read all of it, and I want to, because I had the blessing of getting to do it. But if I could just highlight some events, what I want you to see is God makes the promise, and then God renews the promise. You know what I mean? Like something's going to happen, and then it just impresses me that, Abraham's his father faith. He never wavers, and yet and still God sees fit to give him multiple reassurances that what I'm saying to you is going to come. I don't know, does that mean anything to you to know that he's got this unwavering faith, and yet and still God still gives him multiple times, buddy, I got you. Just keep believing, keep holding on. Even though I know you're not wavering, I want to keep, I don't know, it strikes me. So chapter 12, he's called to go, he goes. Multiple times while he's traveling, he builds altars. Chapter 12 and verse 10, he goes to Egypt because there's a famine. And he prospers because his wife is good looking and Pharaoh likes her. Right? Now, what's the scenario about that? What's Abraham do twice when it comes to his wife Sarah? Is it a whole lie?
Ain't all the truth.
Huh?
It just ain't all the truth.
Well, have you ever heard that phrase? You know, a half truth is a whole lie. You know, he lies twice about what? She is my sister. Because he's worried, because of how good looking she is, when I go to these foreign places, these rich and powerful men are going to want her. What's that mean for me? That's right. And so they don't tell the truth right off the bat. So they go there. Pharaoh kind of likes her. He's allowed to live there. Abraham is, and he prospers. The whole time he's living there, his flocks grow because Pharaoh's like, hey, this is your sister. I really like her. Hey, have some more goats. Have some more cows. Hey, let them pasture. Because, you know, I'm trying to win brother over. And then Pharaoh, you know, finds out. Now, interestingly, when he gets out of Egypt, and obviously Pharaoh's like, why didn't you tell me the truth right off the bat? And Abraham says, because I was scared. It's time for Abraham to leave again, but now he's been prospered. You know, he's got more flocks, he's got more. But when he gets out of Egypt, interestingly, you know what he does when he gets out of Egypt? He builds an altar and he worships. Just kind of interesting to me. That's about 13 and verse 4. Now, he's got Lot with him, his nephew, and they've both prospered. In fact, they're both so prosperous, what do they have to do? Split, because our herdsmen are feuding and fighting with each other. And so maybe it's best, let's just pick. And so Abraham, being the good older, you know, uncle, hey, you pick where you want. And probably to his, you know, future horror, Lot says, hey, I'll take over there. Sodom looks kind of good. Sodom's not awful yet, but it's fertile. And so he goes here, Abraham goes here, and they split. Not long after that, in fact, that's chapter 13 and verse 12. And chapter 13 and verse 14, God reminds them of the promise. You know, it's like, I'm just giving you the cycle is a major life event happens, and then God kind of reminds them, hey, just run to where we're headed. I still got you. Still love you. Still going to make. In fact, 13 verse 14, they split in about verse 12. Verse 14, then the Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, because maybe that was hard. Hey, now my family's dividing. It looks like I'm getting less. God reminds him, look around. North, south, east, west, all the land you see. I'm going to give you and your offspring. How much offspring does he have right now? None. Just go to Egypt, prosper. Got to split with Lot. God reminds him, hey, I still got you. So in verse 18, he goes over the plains of Mamre at Hebron, and he builds an altar to the Lord. That was something that jumped out to me in this study. This time, the multiple altar buildings to worship everywhere he goes. That ought to stick in your mind wherever you go, brethren. You need to be worshiping. You know, and maybe in a lesser extent, but maybe in a fuller extent. Hey, can't worship at the building, you better have an altar somewhere. You know what I mean? Don't get so tied to comfort and ease and air conditioning, whatever. Wherever you are, better be thinking about worshiping. So then chapter 14 is where Abraham has to rescue Lot, because basically the area kings get together and the land of Sodom falls to these other kings. And because he just happens to be living there, Lot gets caught up in that and gets taken away with the other people that lived in the land. Well, Abraham just kind of gets some mighty men. And we're not really told a whole lot about what's Abraham's qualifications other than he's just been around a while and he ain't scared. And he goes with some men, and he goes and rescues and gets Lot back. That's all in chapter 14. Well, we roll around in 15, and guess what God does for Abraham? He gives him a vision to reassure him of the promises one more time. I mean, Lot leaves. I got you, Abraham. You got to go rescue Lot. You get back from that. I got you, Abraham. I don't know. It's just interesting to me. So let's look at 15. Let's go ahead and just read it. This is where the one of the verses we're going to read today. Look at 15, 1 through 6. Chapter 15, 1 through 6. Laura, do you want to read that one?
15.
Yes, ma'am.
Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abraham in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you and your reward will be great." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up to the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith.
All right, you guys give me your impressions of reading that. Anything jump out at you there?
He had a lot of faith. He should.
Is he questioning God the way that, because he doesn't waver. He's not wavering. He can't see how this promise is going to get played out. And so right now, what does he think? Oh, you must be talking about my servant that I'm going to give everything to because I don't have any. So it must be Eliezer. God's like, no, you're going to have a flesh and blood one. Well, that helps me understand a little bit better in chapter 16 where they come up with the Ishmael idea. Because it's flesh and blood now. Well, it can't be Sarah, so it's got to be this. And then when they come around again and Sarah hears it, they're not superheroes, but they do have an incredible faith. Does it impress you at all about just the way God deals with people? Hey, Abram, let me show you. Come on, let's go outside. And I don't know in what form. I don't know if it's just God talking to him. I don't know if it's a heavenly visitor, an angel, whatever. But there's some way that Abraham knows it's God and it's like, hey boy, let's go outside. Clear night, look up, see all them stars? That's what your descendants are going to be like. That's just the constant reassurance. Oh, you parted with Lot? Hey, I just want to remember, I got you. You just got Lot back. Hey, I just want to remind you, I got you. Well, God, I don't see how this is all going to play out unless you're talking about, no, it's not Eliezer, flesh and blood. I got you. And then this is where the one that comes up later is, it was credited to him as right. His faith was credited as righteousness. Later on in this chapter, how this plays out in chapter 15 is God, and I'm going to use a phrase that not all translations, God cuts a covenant with Abraham to show him how sure he is. A covenant. What is a covenant? It's not just a Bible term. What's a covenant? Contract. That's one way. Anything else? A word come to mind?
Promise.
A promise. Kind of a contract with a promise. A bond. I mean, it's an agreement. It's all these things. And does God have to enter in agreements with us? Does he owe us that? But he does. And so what he does here in 15, like starting about in verse 8, is he has Abraham cut these animals and lay them in a path. And has Abraham walk down the middle of the path of the slain animals. And the concept is called cutting a covenant. It's basically kind of way of symboling, if I break my side of the covenant, this is what I'm basically agreeing. It's as sure as death, I'm making this agreement. And God does that. God do that because God needs that? Why would he do that for? Whose sake is that for? Ours. Abraham, who he's dealing with. He cuts that covenant with. Again, another way of showing him there. So chapter 16 is where Abraham and Sarah, he's cut this covenant. Okay, he doesn't mean Eliezer. He must mean flesh and blood. It must be Hagar. And Sarah's part of it. Like, I know she gets angry later because it'd be hard, right? They do this plan first. Abraham goes into another woman. She's able to have the kid, and you're here not able to do that. That's tough, right? Let's just be realistic about it. Let's give Sarah some grace. It would be hard to be part of that. And God's like, no, that's not the plan. This wasn't the plan. Sarah is the plan. In chapter 18, and by the way, 17, look at 17 verse 1. How old is Abraham? 99, the Lord appears and basically again reassures him of the promise. This is where Sarah or Sarai is renamed. Let's see where I got that in my notes. 15 and 16. God says to Abram, as for Sarai, your wife, you're no longer called Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. So it's not Hagar. It's your wife that I said all along. So she's getting reassurance that that's going to happen. Well, it's 18 where it says in 18 verse 1, the Lord appears to Abraham, but he appears in the form of these three visitors. Now, I'm not trying to read where Scripture is not, but three persons show up, but your Bible says, who is it? Who does 18:1 say shows up? The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent. Abraham and looked up and saw three men standing nearby. And when he hurries, this is where he comes out and kind of a picture of hospitality. But God shows up and it's three. And like I said, Old Testament just kind of gives us these winks. What do you think that's an allusion to? It's just, and I don't have fuller explanations for you. That's all we get. All I can say is that's one of them times where God just kind of goes to the New Testament reader. See? You know what I mean? Just, it's interesting, fascinating to me. So they come, and this is where, they're doing all this. And while they're there, verse 10, then one of them said, they're all sitting around, and one in verse 9 says, where's your wife, Sarah? She's over there in the tent, he says. And then one of them says, well, I'll surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah's listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind them. And Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?
Go back, God was showing Sarah that she was going to conceive a child. Well, surely Abraham and Sarah had been trying all these years. Well, she says, take my hand, baby.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it shows her that Abraham was able to father a child. And Sarah says,
Maybe it's,
why is it me? I mean, why not me?
I didn't think about that,
And then it
Billy.
had to build her faith up. Abraham was man enough, and now she's going to get an opportunity.
Did y'all catch that? I didn't think about that until this morning. Is Abraham's old and worn out, good as dead, but hey, God shows, hey, you can have it with what that would do to her. Now I'm the problem. Oh, he's able to, but now maybe I can't. And now God's going to come and reassure her, no, you can't. That's a powerful point.
Yeah, it's running through her mind, I'm sure.
We've been talking about faith in sermons for last couple weeks. We're about out of time, but does it make sense?
Her faith was probably lacking a little bit, where Abraham's wasn't. So the Lord's going to show her it'll happen.
Do you know that it's not just Abraham who's in the Hall of Faith that's mentioned? Do you know that Sarah is mentioned as well in the Hall of Faith? Because she considered him able who had promised. That's what it says about her faith in Hebrews 11. Like I said, we don't have time to probably do this justice. Just so you know, after this, the angels arrive at Sodom. That's when Sodom gets destroyed. Chapter 20, Abraham lies about his wife again because some area kings, God curses that king with nobody in their kingdoms able to get pregnant. In chapter 21, Isaac's born, and no sooner is he born as what does God ask him to do? Does that sacrifice? There's a line in Genesis 22 that talks about, now I know that because you've not withheld your son, your only son. And a lot of people like to make a big deal that God didn't know until then. Do you think that's true? Because in Genesis 18, while Abraham and Sarah are busy making what they're going to make for God, the heavenly visitors, the heavenly visitors have a conversation amongst themselves and say, should we reveal to Abraham all that we have promised, what he's going to be? They're having that conversation. God already knows what he's working through Abraham. Who is the test for in Genesis 22? Does God need to know what Abraham's capable of? Who's the test for? Who was the cutting of the covenant for? Abraham. So when like trials that come our way, and then when God answers our calls, answer our prayers, who is that for? There's just so much to be said and so much that can't be said. I'm just going to let that marinate. You know what? I don't have to dot every T. Dot every T. How about dot every I? Cross every T. I just want like real life stories to marinate for you about what faith is, what it looks like, how it's not always immediately carried out. Hope against hope. I mean, did you catch that in Romans 4? Hoping against hope, but never waver. I mean, just let that marinate about. So when God calls you and I to faith, what does that mean? What does that look like? Does he also show up multiple times and reassure us the way he just let all that matter? I don't even have all the applications for you. Y'all just let that kind of roll around in y'all's brains for the rest of the week, and maybe you get a little closer to the Lord. Let's stop there.